Wow.
How did you get the Blue Knights connection?
I believe, Rob, it came up because we had several students at New Mexico State that were marching Blue Knights, had marched Blue Knights. They'd probably starting to figure out who the heck I was now there in New Mexico. New Mexico has a very strong relationship with the Blue Knights. Lots of Blue Knights come from New Mexico, California, that part of the country. And I believe that's when I met Mr. Pat Amon. And Pat Amon, God rest his soul, just passed away recently, was a wonderful friend of ours and teaching in the Albuquerque area. And I believe when Ralph Hardiman was still writing for the Corps, Pat may have been the caption head. This is like 02, 03, 04. And so Pat got to know me and saw what I was doing at the university, and we got to be friends. And I think at that point, maybe he invited me up. And of course, any time to be in the semi-orbit of Ralph Hardiman, you take it. And so Ralph was probably writing the book at some point in the early 2000s, and that was trickling down to Pat. And so Pat brought me in. I got to know the whole crew in the Blue Knights and stayed on as a consultant for a year or two, and then took over in 2006.
Oh, okay. So your first year there was what, 04? Okay. Didn't we have... was it Josh Nelson on? And yeah, was he on the line there when you were there?
Josh, I believe, was teaching the bass drums in like 04, 05, somewhere around there. Because I remember, because I was hanging with the front ensemble in like 04-ish, maybe 05. And so I would go into the battery room to meet Pat's technicians and listen to the book and everything. And I remember meeting Josh, and Josh and Pat had a relationship, and it was really great to kind of meet people that I'd never experienced before. And he was one of those bass drum techs.
Yeah. Wow. What a small world this whole, the marching percussion scene really is. Yeah.
Let me see if I can put this question together in the right way. We've talked a lot about the educational part of it. And how formative, different places were to that for you. But creatively, as you were sort of, trying out ideas and doing things like that, what drove you creatively back then? Was it more of a conceptual look at it, like these ideas, versus these actual like works, music from different cultures, stuff we just find inspirational? What was the soup that was forming all of that for you at that time as you were, a budding young, arranger composer?
Right. Well, the easiest answer right off the bat, George, is to say all of my heroes were coming out in my work. So without any hesitation, I can rattle off a bunch of them. Mr. Tom Hannum, Tommy Youngst, Ralph Hardiman, Tommy Float. I mean, all of our heroes. I like the two of you, I was in my basement in the 1980s, rewinding my VHS tape to go, wait a second, the 86 Blue Devils, check it. Okay, let me slow that down. Okay. Now, how is he voice? Are the bass drums playing? Oh, just the accent. Okay, let me write that down. So I was listening to Tom Float's, oh my goodness, the way that it just flowed forward with choppiness and a smoothness. And then the other side of the coin, listening to any of those 80s Tom Hannum Garfield lines, the space and the intentionality of density and sparseness and just absolute aggressiveness and then texture shift, all of those things. So I was listening to that quite a bit, and I could go on and on and on. And by the way, to this day, in 2023, as I am creating the book right now for the Blue Knights, everything around me influences me to some degree. The great Tom Rarick, I mean, all the indoor greats that you guys are surrounded with, Kevin Shaw, Mike Jackson, I could go on and on and on and on. So I love figuring out how people arrived at their voice. And so I love figuring out what makes this person sound like them. And one thing, and this is important for me to tell anyone that's listening, this helped me immensely. I was at North Texas at a clinic, and the great Greg Bissonette came in, and he started playing, and he finished up, and he said, "Does anyone recognize that tune?" And a few of us did. And he said, it was a Buddy Rich tune. And he said, "Here's why I played a Buddy Rich tune. Don't let anyone, and I mean anyone in your musical life, tell you that stealing and copying your heroes is wrong." And I remember at that time, kind of being pushed back in my seat. I remember thinking, what? I thought we were supposed to find our own voice. And Greg went on to explain, when you copy people that are better than you, people that you look up to, your heroes, what happens is you start to assimilate that language, yes, but the way that will flow in an output sort of way will only still sound like you. I have remembered that bit of wisdom in 1990 something from Greg Bissonette to apply to everything that I've written in my life. Everything. Now, the three of us could open up a file for a group that I've written for and go, "Oh my gosh, do I hear some like Hockett, Tom Unk's busyness and intensity right there?" Yes, you do. Do I hear some really neat buzz roll, light texture here, and that really sparse biting 5-stroke roll here at letter F? Yeah, it's Tom Hannum. What about these tap rolls and these really quick singles? Yep, that's Tom Float. So you can still find all my influences in everything that I do, but hopefully it still comes across in my voice as an eclectic musician, for sure. Great question, George.
When you took over as caption head for the Blue Knights, was it like, not ever being like a captain head, was it overwhelming for you? Or we talked about imposter syndrome a little bit earlier. Did you have any of that going on at the time? Or were you like confident in your approach on what needed to get done to get that group going?
Yeah, great question, Rob. I would say that I absolutely would have struggled with confidence had I not had the staff that I had. And here's why. Every single person that I was teaching with from 2006 to 2010 was either a former student of mine or a colleague that I taught with or I knew here in Dallas-Fort Worth. So they either knew how I taught, they knew what I wrote, they have either cleaned books that I've written. And, this is what Jeff means when he says agogic at the end of this 5-lit roll. This is the touch you need. Let me show you. Chad Gibson, Jennifer Burns, all those snare techs could just articulate what I thought. So as I'm writing the craziness, I felt confident they could interpret what they needed to say to a snare drummer to get what we were all thinking out, which is very different from this go around. This go around in 2023, I am not the caption head. We have a brilliant young guy by the name of Andrew McAfee. And Andrew, you guys probably know Andrew. He's wonderful. He is the caption head and he is in charge. And I love Andrew, his staff that he's put together, the caption managers, Aya and Mike and the front ensemble caption managers, Malia and Kyler. They are wonderful. But the challenge for me is trying to write and express what I believe is going to serve the brass score through the lens of their experience, their conceptual understanding of what they do, and how does that marry with Jeff Ausdemore? Because it's a very different recipe in 2023. So to me, I obviously look at it as a healthy challenge. And if we do our job correctly as staff and arranger, the students are going to benefit in a way that's different than, okay, here comes Jeff Ausdemore. Here's his staff that he's all taught. It's going to be all consistent. But we have all these brilliant young teachers out there that can offer perspective mechanically, musically, and from a touch perspective as well.
There is so much in what you just said that I think a lot of people, again, as we all, as fans, view the activity that maybe we don't altogether consider. The two big things that jumped out at me, number one, doing what you do in concert with others, right? And having space and where do you fit in and how do you fit together? The other part of, and that's more of like what's going on now. Before, the thing I wanted to ask you about is when creativity meets competition. right? Creating, but then having it having it work within this thing, that we call drum corps, and having it judged and having it impacted, right? Previous to you becoming a judge, right? Back then, what was that like? What was that sort of experience like? Were there any moments, because you've been great about bringing up impactful moments for you, at every stage. That particular job and dealing with the competition aspect of it, is there anything that you can remember of your time where you were like, that were, big moments for you as far as gained experience and in terms of how to do this?
Yes. Usually through the lens, George, of when we go out to compete as the Blue Knights from 2006 to 2010, we're trying to represent who we are at the very highest level and really advocate for that, yes, in critique, but at the end of the day, knowing that the system is flawed, the people judging us are flawed, the people judging us have a bias, not in a malicious way, but in a musical background way, how they filter the criteria on the back of the sheets. So all of those factors always gave me a little bit of confidence in understanding the stoicism that needs to happen in our lives, both personally and professionally. And so the stoic nature of saying, these are the variables that we can control. We can work on our hand speed coming out of letter F. I mean, that's a blind attack 7-let roll. That's hard. So we're going to get it tomorrow. We can control that. I can't control if the great Alan Christensen is going to put us below Blue Devils or above Blue Devils. I can't. But what I can control is sitting in the stands and watching Scott Johnson and back then Jim Wunderlich and or Dave Glide or whoever was writing the book back then. I could sit in the stands and go, wow, that's how they're achieving such greatness. So I want to learn how they're creating these effects and, of course, the excellence too. So it's not just how well, in this case, the Blue Devils are drumming, but how they constructed it. So I always tried to put the onus and responsibility on myself to say, I need to only worry about what I can control in this moment, but behind the scenes, I know what I need to do next year to craft something even better for the sake of our kids. And by the way, if you'll allow me, this is something that I always like to say, is because we're kind of getting into the judging kind of psychology and how others look at the activity and judges and so on and so forth. This is something that surprises a lot of people. When I was 15, 16, 17, 18, whatever it was, and I was marching drum corps, I cared. I wanted to play the snare drum as well as I could to help my section and my drum line and my drum corps. Cool. I did. I tried my best to play clean. Great. Then when I started teaching as a technician, wherever, snare drum, front ensemble, wherever, I cared a lot more because I realized these kids are working their butts off. They're paying a lot of money. And what I say is going to push them one direction or the other. So the heaviness of the moment really laid with me. Then when I started writing their music, it was that times 10. And I realized every decision I make is really going to impact them every day, the thousands and thousands of times they're going to play that lick at letter E. That's because I conceived it here in my home studio, and it needs to be great for their sake, competitively and otherwise, right? But those first 3 levels are a grain in the sand on the beach of what I feel when I judge a group. And this is what shocks most people. Just about everyone that I know and respect as an adjudicator feels the same way. The heaviness, the responsibility, and the pressure to call it as altruistically as possible is absolutely on another planet. I cannot articulate how much pressure I feel when I hit record and I put my headset on and I walk in front of the Blue Coats. Then I walk in front of the Mandarins, and then I walk in front of the Madison Scouts. There is more pressure on myself to, quote, get it right, irrespective of what the internet says. I put more pressure on myself to get it right when I'm wearing the proverbial, it's now a black shirt, but the green shirt, than anything I've ever done in my career. And if if just one person out there in the internet understands what judges feel and care about, 80% of that backlash would go away. They just would. Now, there's always going to be haters in life. I get that. But if they all understood how much we lie awake at night trying to map out a better route to catch the quads after the ballot, and the judges were on the phone sharing, hey, did you hear that the Cavaliers now put their drum solo over on side one? Oh, then I go to Google Docs and I update where I'm going to go sample. We care about getting it right on a level that hardly anyone knows. So I know it's fun. All you do is you open up Drum Corps Planet and you see Jay Ausdemore 18.2, and then your favorite team 16.8. And Jeff Ausdemore is an idiot because I have a numerical representation in front of me on my mobile device. But if they knew the person and the background and the care behind those decisions, I would like to think that it would be a very different social media world.
Yeah. This is what I would say. I would say that on the one hand, I do think that with social media, especially, like what that has sort of brought out is that we are using things like the competitive aspect of this thing that we love the same way we would use sports, professional sports or anything like that. It's mainly just a vehicle for us to get some stuff out, to express things, to relieve the pressure. And sometimes it doesn't even really have to do about that. Here's what I would say though. What I love, or what I would love to sort of get into is, because I think Rob and I are both thoughtful people when it comes to this. At least we try to be, especially because of who we would like to be in the community and everything. But I do feel like there are things we don't understand. So from the point of view of the fan, right, who goes and says, "Man, Boston Crusaders, did you hear them in the lot? They were smoking." And that book, like I couldn't play that, right? And then, that night they get third or fourth or something like that. So there are things about what you as a judge, and now we're in the judging thing, right? That you are really carefully considering, trying very, very hard to get right. How can we reconcile that a little bit in this conversation of maybe what you've seen, people are like, this is why this group, should, or this is how these groups should be evaluated versus how they are actually, like what is actually being considered. Is that sort of like a fair place to sort of start?
It's a great place to start. It's a great place to start, George. So one of the great things about social media is access. So we have, and you're using Boston Crusaders as an example. Let's run with that. The Boston Crusaders battery this past year was just wonderful, wonderful. Vocabulary, the chops, the space, the demand, all of it. There's a lot that goes into making a drumline that good. For sure. So let's just make that a standalone point. When you see, let's say the Boston Crusaders in this case, because we're all agreeing that they're very, very good. When you see a group that's that good, not finished first, that means that either the judge got it totally wrong. That's a very easy possibility. Or there are other criteria by which are not being represented by this overwhelming emotional experience by seeing Moeller singles and these quick flam drags and this blind attack and then fours. That's amazing. But that only has a certain numerical representation on the bullet points on one column of one side of the sheet. And so what I'm saying in a bunch of extra verbiage right now is that could be overrepresented in terms of the visceral reaction that all of us have when you hear something that good. So it is one part of a very, very deep equation. So to be super snarky, if Jeff Ausdemore, I'm a fan of Boston Crusaders, let's say, and I go up and I see Jay Ausdemore put them in anything other than first, I'm going to say, oh, you got it wrong, and the system is rigged, so on and so forth. all someone would need to do to really give me a greater perspective is show the totality of all the considerations that drum judge that night is considering. The entire second half of the percussion orchestra we call the Fern Ensemble, right? Now, in Boston's case, they're wonderful too. So obviously it's very difficult, but then you have the content, you have the environment, you have the multiple responsibility, and it gets layered and layered, and it's through time and all these decisions. And so when you have the complexity of arriving at a numerical and imperfect number on an imperfect and fallible human being, it's a recipe for someone to disagree. So hopefully that explains it a little bit more deeply. The system that we have now is one that is incredibly thought through. It's incredibly well vetted by the instructors in the caucuses. And here's another thing that I'd like to just point out as long as we're talking about this. Believe it or not, the judges do not make up the sheets. We do not make up the sheets. We are in dialogue with the instructors and the drum corps. The drum corps are in charge of the sheets, and this is what we want to see rewarded. This is what we want the judges to look for. This is what we want credited. And the judges say, thank you very much. Let's talk about it. We want to understand it. Each and every year, we try to stay refreshed and plugged in to a symbiotic relationship through which the judges are trying to credit, reward, and prop up the brilliant designers and brilliant performers each and every year, because as we all know, the bar is just doing this. WGI, DCI, every year it's going up and up and up. So to stay on top of what kids are actually throwing down and what's required to make them that good, we have to have an understanding of what the instructors want us to look for in the sheets. Therefore, the judges are not coming up with the sheets themselves. The judges are beholden to what the activity wants. We are merely trying to play it fair and as even-keeled and unemotional as possible for the benefit of the kids.
Is it safe to say that, we talk about social media, that sometimes we as fans judge who should win based on lot videos from...
Oh, 100%, Rob. 100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you just threw me a beautiful softball. Thank you, Rob. Allow me to smash that out of the park.
Please do.
Yeah, so when you have these impressive lot videos, it's just something that we all want to stand up and applaud. It's just that exciting. It's amazing. But there are so many other details that go into it with respect to things that you cannot see in a lot video. You don't know where they are in the field, how it relates to the brass and these responsibilities and how it intersects with the front ensemble and all of the myriad bullet points that we have to consider and give as equal credence to through time. Yes, these 3 bars might be the most amazing quad feature DCI will ever see, and that could absolutely be the case. But through time of a 10.5-minute show and the other bullet points that I am being asked and paid to reinforce and monitor throughout the entire show, it would be irresponsible for me to overreact to this moment that we all see on a lot video. That might be the best way for me to say that. It's easy for the entire social media universe to get mad that a judge didn't react enough to something really cool that we can see online.
That's cool. And, we kind of skipped over this, but you taught Blue Knights through 2010, correct?
Yes, sir.
How did you transition from being an instructor to a judge? Was it immediately after that?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked, Rob. So the caption head at the time was a gentleman by the name of Glenn Fugit. And Glenn's career is widely known throughout the state of Texas and the country. And I believe he was the percussion caption at that time. And he and some other DCI leadership, for whatever reason, and I don't remember at what point, approached me and said, we think that you would make an excellent adjudicator. And at that point, I remember thinking to myself, I am humbled. I'm honored. I'm thrilled. There's no way that I, A, could do that job well, B, would be willing to put myself out there. And the more that I thought about it over the months and months, and when I finally entered the judging pool after reflecting on it for quite some time, I figured that I wanted to serve the very community that has given me so much. And so when people ask me what it's like to be a DCI judge, what's it like to stand in front of the Boston Crusaders baseline? What's it like to stand in front of Santa Clara's front ensemble? What's it like? I always say that it's equal parts thrill and terror. The weight of responsibility, because I want to articulate what I'm feeling and trying to critique. And also, he's good. Okay. I want to feel the responsibility and be as mindful as I can about all the musical environments that I'm listening to, and give constructive, counselor-driven, or even critic-driven feedback, depending on the level of the performer, but also the weight and fear of getting it wrong. So it's equal parts fear and thrill in many aspects. But when I finally decided to judge and really kind of say yes to their asking, it was because I felt like I've been given this life that I wake up every day, especially now in my life, I wake up every day and pinch myself that I'm able to carve out all these unique opportunities. And for me to stand in front of the world's best players and be as critical and enthusiastic and cheer them on at the same time is something that I don't ever take lightly. And I wanted to do at the very highest level and give back. So I looked at it as something that I could finally do to give back to DCI, because I had had so many wonderful opportunities in DCI. It was the least I could do to try to move the activity forward to the very, very best of my ability. And one other thing I'll say about that, Rob, sometimes people have this understanding, or even they heard this about a judge, or they heard this about a score in this decade or that decade. I told the DCI team when they asked me to come aboard those years ago that if there was anything that was improper at all, if I even whiffed something that was somebody was kind of mentioning that I should favor this or numerical, zero. I said, not only would I quit on the spot, but I would absolutely tell everyone. And to Glenn's credit and all of my DCI bosses, the John Phillips of the world, the Nola Joneses of the world, the Jay Kennedys of the world, all those supervisors in my life over the years, they have been nothing except supportive and brilliant in trying to help all of us be better musicians by way and virtue of listening more critically and rewarding different things and studying the sheets more deeply. They have been nothing except pure about creating the activity as integrity filled as possible. So I have zero complaints and 100% humility when it comes to my time with DCI.
But what about all the judging conspiracies we've heard about? You're telling me that's not real? That's not a thing?
I'm telling you, they are absolutely false.
So, I mean, it's a really, really heavy burden. And so let me ask you this. In this past decade plus that you've been doing this job, judging has evolved, changed a little bit. Sheets, obviously, like whether or not you can go out onto the field. Judging in itself, from an outsider's perspective, feels like this isn't gymnastics where everybody's doing the same compulsory skills and everything has a certain value to it, or figure skating or something like that. Apples and oranges, and sometimes grapefruits, and sometimes a steak, or a lemonade, right? It's all of this stuff that you're being asked to judge. Is the current version at all frustrating with regards to your ability to do that, or any of the judges' ability to do that? Do you have the time, the exposure, to be able to consider everything that you need to, and to be able to take all of it in? Is there anything that you can see that could be a direction to make it even better? Both in a judge's ability to do the job, right? But then is also reflective of rewarding everything that should be rewarded in this thing that you're considering.
Is there anything you'd like to see that would help you to put the best number out that you think could be representative of the night?
Yeah. So talk about a tenuous answer that you're asking me to step into, gentlemen. The short answer is that there is no perfect system, because we either expand the role to someone else alongside me that is either up higher to evaluate the totality of how the percussion ensemble works together. And by the way, if we just did that, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups are all going to flip-flop if we did that. However, if we added someone to only stay with the battery, so that's a different way to allocate resources, then all of a sudden, those 5 groups, they're all flip-flopped again. Then you go back to the system where it's one person, and now we're able to go out in the field and spend more time with the battery in a wider swath of the show. But then now we miss all of the transition time getting back to the front ensemble, not to mention the safety concerns, so on and so forth. So in each of those 3 scenarios that I just invented, every one of them has a different winner. Every one of them. So at some point, we need to recognize the autonomy of what the members feel is best. Now, the members obviously don't all agree. We know where Skojo feels on this on this topic, for instance. And of course, I have an opinion as well. Everybody has an opinion based on what's going to either A, be the best for the activity because they have an altruistic heart, or they have a competitive perspective because they know that that's going to serve their drum corps the best. And I certainly don't begrudge people for that, but generally they fall into those 2 camps. And so your question of which system is going to give me the best number, the best system is allowing me to have headphones on and have like a boom crane, and I can float above the pit, and then also hear the battery in my right ear, and then also have a stereo mic in the front ensemble in my left ear, and I want to score in front of me. So I want to see what they're playing. I want to hear everything they're playing at the right time. Oh, and I need to be omniscient. I need to be in front of every kid for every second. And because that's not necessarily a viable possibility in 2023, we go to the systems that the people that are in charge of kids, the people that are doing the work, tell us to do.
So in other words, drones.
I mean,
that's what you took out of this, Rob?
We've talked about this in the past. We've talked about this.
We've literally talked about this.
Talked about
multiple cameras, multiple cameras, and it's literally like you're sitting in a control room, and it's just punch over here now. Now give me that audio feed. I mean, this even goes back to because obviously indoor. Being exposed to, teaching in SCPA and also going to the WGI advisory board meetings, all of this stuff gets discussed. I remember there was, and these conversations really last a long time. I remember there was a conversation once about, do the judges have enough time in between ensembles? Right. And
kind of like to cleanse your palate.
Well, to even just get your thoughts organized about a group before you then have to get ready for the next group, and they've, but then the practical matters of the runtime of the entire show and all of that stuff. And then, I mean, we haven't even gotten into our critiques. Does that system work? Like, do you have enough time with a judge, and how do you use that time and all of that? I mean, and I think the sort of big lesson here is all of that should inform this emotional, visceral reaction we all have to it. We should all know that the system's imperfect, essentially, and focus also, and also be able to focus on that, that this competitive, thing that gets injected into essentially all of this artistic and athletic, activity. It has a healthy impact on it as well. So I think that's sort of like the big lesson here. It's going to be pretty hard to, Although they're always going to keep trying to make it better, right?
But it's never going to be perfect.
It's never going to be perfect.